We have a government that's already lost its way, a government with no real sense of urgency and no positive flavour or theme of any kind. I ask the Leader of the House, we know what and who this government is against. But what is this government for? But, Madam Deputy Speaker, as with the Galactic Empire, so it is with the Labour Party. And recent events have reminded us of the truth of that ancient saying that power reveals. So it is with this new government. What have its first chaotic few months in office revealed? Well, first, we know it likes to say one thing and do another. It talks about supporting working people, but the rise in national insurance will hit all working people. It talks about growth, but it has imposed the largest tax rise for a generation, pushing up both interest rates and inflation. Only last week we saw a reported 64% rise in companies filing for insolvency compared to the same week last year. And that's before all the red tape of the new employment bill, which will make it harder than ever to give someone a job and grow a business. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is so much sheer incompetence here. To take one example, the government's raised employer national insurance, lowered the income threshold and increased the minimum wage all at the same time. But no one seems to have noticed that the combined effect of these measures is to raise the cost of hiring an entry-level employee not by 2%, but by something closer to 12%. That is a terrible blow, especially to the retail and hospitality sector. So I asked the Leader of the House, was this deliberate or was it just a mistake? And will she ask the Treasury to publish an assessment of the total impact of these three measures before any legislation comes to this House? Secondly, we know the government is willing, even keen, to play the politics of division. It has favoured public sector workers over private sector ones. It has driven away entrepreneurs and business creators. It has been absolutely punitive, as we have heard this morning, on rural areas. The rise in national insurance puts huge pressure on already struggling rural GPs and care homes, dentists, pharmacists, and hospices. Mental health and disability charities have already expressed their deep concern. We heard from the dispatch box only just now that the government hears the concerns, but if it did actually understand them, why has it not done anything so far? Why did it not address them in advance? Meanwhile, the agricultural tax changes will afflict vastly more farming families than the Treasury estimates, families who work all hours, whatever the season, on very low margins. I can see the embarrassment, Madam Deputy Speaker, written all over the faces of the members opposite, many of whom represent rural areas for the first and very likely now the last time. And thirdly, we know the government seems to have zero appetite to take on vested interests or reform our hugely pressured public services. It has shovelled out cash to its union friends who have been delighted to stick to their fax machines and similarly ancient working practices. And what has the government got in return for all these millions? No commitments to make any efficiencies whatsoever. Nor does the government seem much interested in legislation. It has not presented many bills, and the bills so far have often included not carefully drafted law, Madam Deputy Speaker, but simply a vague and sweeping arrogation of new powers. This is what governments do, Madam Deputy Speaker, when they don't know what to do. The government is even hiding behind the very early presentation of a private member's bill on assisted dying, one of the most sensitive and complex issues we face. The Prime Minister himself promised Esther Ranson in March that he would make time to debate these issues, but yesterday he refused the request of my right honourable friend for Wetherby and Easingwold to give the bill more time at report stage. Will that Leader of the House now give that commitment? Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, the astonishing fact is that after 14 years in opposition, the Labour Party came into office with almost no real plans. Instead, we have a government that's already lost its way, a government with no real sense of urgency and no positive flavour or theme of any kind. I ask the Leader of the House, we know what and who this government is against. But what is this government for?
He asked about a number of budget measures, but I'm afraid the cat really was out of the bag this week, wasn't it, Madam Deputy Speaker? Because we finally learnt that the Conservative Party supports all the benefits that the budget brings, but they don't support any of the measures that will pay for them, because we are actually now seeing a return to the magic money tree economics pursued by his predecessor, Liz Truss. We have had to make difficult choices to balance the books so that there's no return to austerity, and we can both invest in the economy and renew our public services for the long run. And I'm afraid he is scaremongering about a number of issues that he raises there, because he will know that more than half of employers will see no change at all or will pay no additional national insurance from this package. He failed to mention the really important changes we're making to business rates, which will support many high street businesses. So he might want to include that in his future calculations. And charities and GPs and other healthcare providers, they are, as has just been said by my honourable friend at the dispatch box, they have been put in an incredibly precarious position after 14 years of chronic underinvestment and mismanagement by the party opposite, and we will do what we can, and further announcements will be made about the distribution of health funding. But just to put on record that the NHS has received its single biggest increase in its spending power for many, many years. Is that something that he supports, or is it something that he rejects? Because I'm not quite clear now what their position on the budget is anymore. We have had to make tough choices because of the poison chalice and the inheritance left by his party. Something that, and I quote, was once described as a struggling economy and anemic growth. Not my words, but his.
Navendra Mishra.